Hey everyone, Ben here, and I wanted to wrap up my thoughts on the Church of the Nazarene General Assembly, which finished about a week ago. And I know I'm a little late getting this video out. It's been a crazy week, but I wanted to just offer my thoughts and go over some things. But first off, I wanted to go over some of the resolutions that passed and just do kind of a recap on that, which you can see my other videos, my live streams where I took a closer look at a lot of what was going on there, sort of as it unfolded. And I want to give a shout out here. I didn't get permission to share like who made this spreadsheet, but someone made this spreadsheet and shared it with a bunch of people. And I think they made it open. Their contact information is somewhere on this spreadsheet, but because I'm not personally connected to this person, I didn't feel right just putting that out there. But if this person who made the spreadsheet finds this video or whatever and you give permission for it, thank you. Just let me know. But the person who made this did a phenomenal job. They were tracking all the resolutions, all the ballots, and it was just really, really well done. It made my life easier for sure because I couldn't watch all the live streams because I would have been watching YouTube like all day, every day as General Assembly is going, listening to all the conversations and the discussions and the debates and going over every single ballot. So this person did a phenomenal job following everything. And first things first, the Church of the Nazarene had two general superintendents, which is the highest position you can have in the Church of the Nazarene, retire. So that meant that they had to vote for two new general superintendents. And the results of that vote came down to Scott Daniels, who is now one of the general superintendents, and also Christian Sarmiento. So those are the two general superintendents, and so they're the new GSs. As far as some of the resolutions that were noteworthy, at least as far as I'm concerned, I know on every single one of these resolutions, there's a lot of people behind it that were really, passionate about it. I don't want to discount that, but I also don't want to go over every single one because we'll be here for forever. So one of them I already commented on, which is requiring membership for baptism. That one was killed by because the committee that oversaw it, the Christian Action Committee, unanimously recommended that it be rejected. And so when it got to the floor, they just did an up or down vote. They didn't have discussion or debate. And the General Assembly voted to accept the recommendation. And so it wasn't rejected. The term is it was killed. So I just find that a funny way to word it. I don't know why it's called killed. That's a bit strong, but it didn't pass. It didn't even come up for discussion. There were some other things too, like the capital punishment revisions that were recommended are now referred. So they'll go back to committee and they'll be up for discussion and revision, and then they'll come up at the next General Assembly in 4 years. And this is something I mentioned in one of the live stream videos. That I feel is, I don't know if I'd call it a flaw in the system as much as, I think I would call it a flaw in the system, which is people are obviously concerned about what do we make of capital punishment, like the death penalty. And now they have to wait 4 more years before they can get any real clarity on it. And even then, it'll take even longer because, like I mentioned in another video, the way the process is, the next General Assembly, it will be up for conversation again. And then if it's voted to be adopted at the next General Assembly, which is in 4 years, then it goes to the districts. They all have to vote on it. And then it's not codified, like it's not made official until the next General Assembly. So what we're looking at here is it's going to be at least 8 years, best case scenario, before there's a definitive clarification on the death penalty for the Church of the Nazarene. So that's something to keep in mind with that. Human sexuality and marriage, there was some rewording on that one that was rejected. And then there is a clarification on rewriting a paragraph in regards to gender identity that was adopted, which, as some people said, the wording there is not great. Even the way it is now with the rewrite is not great, but whatever. But even then, like, even though these things are adopted, like, they still have to be ratified by districts. So none of these are officially set yet. They just move on to the next stage. Church program, nothing really there. District administration, nothing I really want to touch on there. I just dropped something. General administration. This I thought was interesting. There was a resolution to not require General Assembly to be held in June, which passed, and so that means that the next General Assembly, I shouldn't say the next one, because again, this has to be ratified. But in the future, we might see General Assembly happening at other times of the year, which is fine. A special judicial, there was something in here I wanted to touch on, which was... maybe it wasn't in this one. I'm not sure. Well, the ritual for the baptism of infants is adding the Apostles' Creed to that form, or that format, I should say. The actual like process of baptizing someone. The ritual, adding the Apostles' Creed to the ritual, is adopted. So that's good to see. Always nice to see the creeds added. Local administration, I don't think it was in here. There was like one other thing I wanted to touch on. It might have been local administration. Where was it? It was the one that dealt with a conflict of interest. Was that in this one? Ministry and education? I don't think so. This one, they did adopt the resolution that removed the office of the deaconess, and then they referred the resolution to remove the order of deacon, which, as far as deaconess is concerned, I'm okay with that, because a deaconess should just be a female deacon anyway. I don't know why there was like a separate office for that. It seems a bit sexist to me. I say that a bit tongue-in-cheek, because originally the order of deacon was derived from the order of deaconess. So there's some interesting history there, but regardless, I know there's still a lot of people who are motivated to see the order of deacon just removed entirely, which, I mean, people have different opinions on that, and just so I don't forget to mention it later, I'll just sort of touch on this now. It is interesting to see the conversations develop around this, because you do have people in the Church of the Nazarene, in particular clergy, who are more sacramentally oriented, and when they articulate their understanding of a deacon, it is much closer to like an Anglican or a Catholic view of what the role of a deacon is. And the people who are really motivated to just see the order of deacon go are your more evangelical, low church style, who just see it as pretty much useless. Like, well, what's the point, right? Like, everyone's a pastor, everyone's a minister, you know, the priesthood of believers and all that. So why do we have a distinction between elder and deacon? Let's just get rid of deacon and just keep elder. So those conversations are fun to follow. But also sort of frustrating at times too, because the Church of Nazarene doesn't claim to hold either view or perspective in particular. And so it really just comes down to people's personal views. And some people get frustrated when they don't see their personal view reflected in the official teaching and positions of the Church of the Nazarene. And so you have that, which that is something I will touch on a little bit later here. So the only other thing... Okay, I must have missed it. It must have been under local administration then. Let me see. I saw it earlier. Maybe it was special judicial? No. Well, regardless, I'm not going to spend a bunch of time looking for it. But the point is, there was something in here regarding like the local church board, and how if a board member is related to someone that would benefit from a vote coming from the board, then they should recuse themselves. And I had made the point, I feel like this is going to make small churches face a lot of difficulties. And then I gave the example of one of the churches where I pastored, where like everyone on the board was related. And so on a lot of things that we voted for, you could argue there was conflict of interest, but everyone handled it well, and it never created any issues, as far as I recall. Like, no one ever got upset when something didn't pass that would have benefited them or their family or blah, blah, blah. And that just comes down to maturity, which, if you're serving on the board, you should be a mature Christian anyways. So, whatever. Regardless, those things did pass. Those resolutions did, so that's going to be up for the districts to affirm that. So, and I was a little bit disappointed. Like, I understand the reason for it, especially in larger churches or churches where there's a lot of controlling people and kind of like a patriarchy or matriarchy situation going on where like certain people or certain families kind of run the church. I definitely see that resolution as being helpful there. But at the same time, some local churches might just ignore it anyways. And I did see that in my church where, and not out of malice, but there were some things in the manual that local church board just was just like, yeah, whatever. Like, we won't follow that. Like, and there's no real way to enforce it unless you get your district superintendent involved. And in that case, sometimes the district superintendent won't even care. So there's no strong authority to really enforce some of these. And I guess that's a good balance, I guess, to that sort of resolution. That's the conflict of interest thing among board members, is a local church, if they function fine and a lot of people are related and it's not a big deal, like a church that I pastored, then they can just say, well, whatever, we'll just keep doing things the way we are and call it a day, which I think is fine. So, and those are the only resolutions I wanted to look at. But I wanted to give my feelings overall. I thought about talking more about some of the resolutions that passed or some of the events that transpired or some of the conversations that developed around General Assembly and during General Assembly, such as some people getting upset when Scott Daniels was elected as a general superintendent because he's a white man, which I have my own thoughts on stuff like that. Namely, I never liked when people would get upset or when people would advocate for, oh, we need to have a woman serve as a general superintendent, or we need to have someone who is Hispanic or Asian or African serve as a general superintendent strictly because they're a woman or because of their nationality. That never made sense to me, because when it comes to leadership in the church, it's not about who best represents you. It's about who best represents Christ to you. Like, that's what leadership in the church is supposed to be. So in that regard, I never cared what nationality someone was, what gender someone was. I only cared about who is most like Christ, who is going to draw me closer to Christ by their leadership and by their teaching and by their leading. The rest of it, it's whatever. The rest of it, I almost feel like you're making that thing an idol, whether it's gender or nationality, to say, no, we must have someone who is like this. I think it's sort of flipping the paradigm on its head. Again, it's like, are you wanting someone who just best represents you or best represents other particular people? Or do you want someone who best represents Christ? And then I think we're running into some weeds when we want to say that, well, the best way to represent Christ is to have someone from these nationalities or men or women fill these roles, because that sort of implies that people who are not those nationalities or someone who is not that gender can't represent Christ well enough. And then, again, I just feel like that gets you into some really weird theological positions. Like, for example, someone saying that, well, we need a woman general superintendent, which we have a woman general superintendent. Carrie Sundberg is a general superintendent. But some people saying, like, well, I remember when she was being elected, in the process of being elected, And some people were just like, yeah, we need to elect her because she's a woman. And, well, I guess I shouldn't say too much about that because that's sort of assuming a lot. But essentially what I was about to say was, if you want to take the position that leadership is supposed to best represent Christ, and then you say, no, we must have a woman, then that seems to me to imply that men are insufficient to represent Christ. Like, there has to be a woman, otherwise you can't represent Christ well enough. And again, I think that's a problem. Now I understand Genesis 1:27, male and female, he created them, in the image of God he created them. That men and women together best represent Christ, but that's a separate conversation, I think. You know what? I'm sort of in the weeds myself on this one. I'm just going to move on. So my overall thoughts of General Assembly, I mean, I got to be honest here. It was weird a little bit. I was quite fascinated watching things develop and hearing people talk, because it really, like, I kind of felt like I was back in my Nazarene days when I was attending General Assembly, or when I was watching General Assembly, or just following it closely online or something. Because I feel like no matter who you are, going into General Assembly, you have all these high hopes, right? Like, oh, maybe now, by the resolutions that pass, by the people who are elected to the General Superintendency, by the leadership shifts that we see throughout the denomination, maybe now the denomination will start going down a better path, or will start, correcting some of the errors that it had in the past. Now, regardless of what your persuasion is, right? Maybe you're more Wesleyan, right? So you want, like, the richer theological traditions start coming through. You want a higher view of the sacraments. You want more emphasis on developing a sound and effective and rich liturgy starting to disseminate throughout the denomination. Or maybe you're of an evangelical persuasion and you want a more emphasis on, like, revival services. You want more emphasis on just getting people saved. You want more emphasis on not focusing on the theological distinction so much. Just let that fall by the wayside. Let's just focus on, sharing the gospel. Or maybe you're more of a fundamentalist and you say, no, we need to really emphasize a literal interpretation of Genesis 1-11. Like, maybe you're just a really big Ken Ham follower in that regard. And you just want to see more emphasis on that. But wherever you're coming from, in the Church of the Nazarene, you go into General Assembly and you think and you expect and you hope, hey, you know what? Now, because of XYZ resolution that's on the floor, whether it passes or whether it is rejected, hey, that will now lead the church in the right direction. But then what happens throughout General Assembly is you start encountering these other positions and people who don't want the denomination to go in the direction that you do. So you start getting frustrated. You start following these conversations. And then some of the resolutions you wanted to pass kind of pass, but maybe they were changed a little bit, or maybe you heard some other opinions that made you think different about it, or maybe you heard some opinions that got you concerned about the future. And some other things you wanted adopted just got flatly rejected. And maybe the people you wanted to serve in leadership and get elected to the general superintendency, they didn't get elected. Instead, someone else got elected. Hey, you're not really sure how they're going to do. And so you leave General Assembly thinking, well, some good things happened. Some things I liked happened. Some things I didn't like happened. And it's clear that these other positions that I don't agree with are still very present in the denomination, and nothing really got resolved. There's no clear idea where the denomination is headed. But maybe next time, as things develop, we can right the ship. I feel like that's a lot of people's experiences throughout General Assembly. And a lot of people's experiences with the Church of the Nazarene in general, which is to say, it's conflicting, right? On the one hand, there's some things about the denomination, and I'm speaking from the perspective of having been in the Church of Nazarene like my whole life. So I'm speaking from that perspective, and I'm trying to articulate things that other people have said to me. So you have these hopes for the denomination, but you also have these fears of, well, what if this happens? Or there's these things, or there's these teachings, or these positions that I really don't agree with. I find highly problematic. Maybe they can change in the future. But as time goes on, they never do. They might change a little bit. But a lot of the things that you struggle with, they're still there. But there's these other things that you really appreciate too, like the freedom in the Church of the Nazarene to kind of lead a church. If you're a clergy person, you can lead your local church however you want to, right? Like, I don't know if I mentioned it before, but there's some Nazarenes I know, some Nazarene pastors, who if you walk into their church, it's almost like walking into a Catholic church. Like, the liturgy is very structured. You even have some of the same prayers. They follow the lectionary. They have communion every week. But then you could go right down the street to another Nazarene church, and they are like, just like non-denominational, stereotypical, right? Just, it's whatever. Like, I went to one church where they never planned anything when it came to the Sunday morning church service. You walk in there, and it's just, they're like, well, however the Spirit leads. So they'll sing some songs that are just kind of not made up on the spot, but are decided on the spot. And then the pastor gets up to preach, and it's just whatever comes to his mind. It's basically just a stream of consciousness sermon. So there's a lot of freedom in the Church of Nazarene. There's some doctrines that are really good, but it depends on how you interpret those doctrines, like entire sanctification. There's so many ways to understand that. And you can take whatever theological perspective you want. And so, all that to say, I mentioned this to my wife after a General Assembly. I said, I'm kind of thankful I'm not in the Church of the Nazarene anymore, having watched this General Assembly. And I'm not saying this to insult people who are Nazarene right now. I'm not saying that. If you're in the Church of Nazarene, that's great. I know some of you subscribe to me, you've commented on my videos. You've been awesome. Welcome to the channel, by the way. Really glad you're here. But I just said, because at the end of the day, just going through the emotional up and downs through General Assembly and being in conversation with several people who were watching very closely what was going on, I said there's just so much uncertainty that's always there in the Church of the Nazarene. Because you never know what's going to happen, because there's no clear path that the denomination is taking. Is it going to be more sacramental? In some ways, yeah. In other ways, no. Is it going to be more fundamentalist? In some ways, yeah. In some ways, no. Is it going to follow more closely with, like, Reformed theology? The way some things are worded, yes. And some things, no. And then, like, you listen to the different general superintendents speak throughout the assembly, like the service where Crocker gave everybody stoles who wanted a stole and talked about the priesthood of all believers. And some people loved it because it was breaking down the distinction between clergy and layperson. You had some people who were upset about it because it did that, and because it just brought some confusion about what is this. And then you had the General Superintendent Emeritus, Jerry Porter, who gave a message basically saying defining doctrine is not important, or not as important as just loving people, which I talked about that at length in the last video. But then you have other general superintendents who seem to be pretty solid, like theologically minded. I know Carla Sundberg. I called her Carrie earlier. That was a mistake. Her name's Carla Sundberg. You had Carla Sundberg, who's pretty solid in her theology, at least from what I've read. I could be mistaken. I don't know. And so there's just this constant uncertainty that people in the denomination are facing because they don't really know what the Church of the Nazarene is. And so everyone kind of makes it what they want. So you have some people who are just hardcore fundamentalist. You have some people who are hardcore Reformed. You have some people who are hardcore Wesleyan. and they all find their place. But then when General Assembly comes around, everyone wants to have a voice. Well, not everyone can have a voice. And so it just becomes this weird mishmash of different perspectives. But at the end of the day, everyone's like, well, we're all Christian, and that's all that really matters. But nothing's really clarified, and everyone has to go back to their own setting and their own church and just sort of figure out, again, what does all this mean? What does it mean to be a part of the Church of the Nazarene? Like when people ask questions about doctrine, or when you face difficult situations that you need clarity for, what are you supposed to do? And a lot of people just sort of make it up on their own. They look to other sources for theology because the Church of the Nazarene is theologically deficient in a lot of ways. And I'm not saying to be disrespectful. It's intentional that it's deficient, because it tries to be this big tent denomination where everyone feels welcome, no matter what your theological persuasion is, no matter what your background is, no matter what your church history is, and you can just find your place here. But the problem is when you try to be all things to all people, you end up kind of being nothing. And that's just how I feel General Assembly tends to feel for a lot of people afterwards, right? They go back home, assembly's over, and they just sort of sit and reflect on what happened at General Assembly, and it's just kind of like, not much. Like, we wanted clarity on things, we didn't get it. We wanted certain positions adopted or clarified, we didn't get it. We wanted a better idea of where the denomination is headed, we didn't get it. So it's just a fascinating position, I think, for a lot of people to be in. And it's hard, you know? Like, I say all this with love. I love the Church of the Nazarene. And it breaks my heart to say this stuff, because it sounds like I'm being mean. And I'm not trying to be mean. I'm just trying to be genuine here and just share what this is for a lot of people, which is a lot of confusion, a lot of mixed feelings. So yeah, so I thought I'd just leave my thoughts there. And because I don't want to say too much more, but I could say more in future videos. Like, I know one thing a commenter said is they're interested to hear my take on the current article of faith on entire sanctification, which I will do a video on that. So I guess now I'll transition into what's coming next, right? Because those are my thoughts on General Assembly. I'll leave it there. So what's coming next for my channel? Expect to see the next video, which I'm planning on doing kind of a response to a common argument against the Catholic Church during the medieval era, around the time of the Reformation. I want to do a video on that. It's something that's always bugged me, and I want to focus on that. And then after that, I'm going to be doing a response video, a charitable response video, to something I saw a fellow YouTuber make a while ago. But I thought it was interesting. There's someone I've engaged with in the past in my other channel, so I thought, you know what, that'd be a good video to do. So a bit more general content. I'm going to hold off on Nazarene stuff for a little bit, because I know I sort of overloaded. The last 4 videos, at least, were just on the Church of the Nazarene, and I know it's not just Nazarenes on my channel. I want to respect that. Plus, you know, I don't want my channel to be just Nazarene stuff. I like it to be, you know, a bit more general. There's some videos I've been wanting to make. So yeah, so thanks for tuning in. Thank you all for sharing your thoughts on the videos and your comments. I've appreciated that. Even people who've like found me on like Facebook and have messaged me, and even phone calls that I've had and emails. It's been really good to connect with some of you and just hear your stories and your thoughts on a lot of the stuff that's been going on. So that being said, thank you all for watching, and I will see you next time.